We now have a special message from the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres.
I'm pleased to greet the World Innovation Summit for Education. And I am especially grateful for Her Highness Sheikh Moza for her commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals and her efforts to help the millions of children and youth who are not enjoying the benefits of education. Our century calls for new skills to adapt to a world of rapid change. It calls on us to bridge divides and live together as global citizens. Education holds the key. Innovation will be critical. Let us work together to ensure education for all, and above all, for marginalized children across the world, including in conflict zones. Thank you for your commitment to this work.
Well, as the UN Secretary-General just said there, in a world of rapid change, education is the key. The key to preparing to think about an uncertain future. The key to unlocking potential, all potential, in any country, in any situation, whatever the barriers. The key to building united and resilient societies. And this really is what led to this year's program. On the one hand, there are ongoing threats to what you all do because of conflicts, because of the rise of extremism and a lack of dialogue. On the other hand, our entire lives are changing dramatically as we come to terms with our new digital age, from artificial intelligence to virtual reality. And of course, this is having an impact on teaching and learning. So how is education changing? Well, for starters, as Her Highness said, truth and fact can mean different things to different people depending on their worldview. And really, who better to discuss this new phenomenon than CNN host and one of my personal favorite journalists, not to mention among the world's best foreign policy analysts, Fareed Zakaria. Fareed, welcome.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure and honor to be back in Doha. I was in Doha many years ago and have been stunned to see how much it has grown. But you know, throughout the Arab world, and particularly when you go to the Gulf, you are always struck by the buildup of physical capital. The buildings, the skyscrapers, the new hotels. What is striking about Qatar and Doha is the buildup of intellectual capital. You see a conference like this, an organization like this, building year to year, creating the kind of convening power that we typically think of as coming from the great education centers in the Western world, and to see it growing organically now has been quite an extraordinary development. I think it owes enormous amount to the leadership of Her Highness and Her Excellency, and I congratulate you for really doing something that I believe will outlast even the influence of the World Cup in football. This one will last for generations. I think about the issues that you face at this conference over the next few days. And education faces an enormous set of challenges. The first one, I think, is, of course, and the one we can all easily imagine, is how to educate people in a digital age, how to educate people in an age of technological revolution. And I think about it all the time because I have kids, and you know, I look at the amount of time, for example, that they spend teaching my child how to spell. And I'm thinking about it and noticing that every gadget I have now, every phone, every tablet, every computer has a spell check on it. And I'm wondering to myself, is this the best use of the precious resources of a school? I'm watching simple computation being taught by rote. And I'm thinking to myself, you just put this into Google and you get the answer immediately. is this the most useful way to spend precious educational resources? And I don't have the answer. I just ask this as questions. I notice that one of the challenges that real educators and real people out there in the world are having is figuring out this question of what is it that human beings should master in an age when the computer can outsmart us at so many things. So let me give you an example. I have a friend who runs a hospital system in India. And he was telling me that because they need really 10 times as many doctors as they have, what they have started doing is using computers to do the diagnosis. And what they found, what they started with necessity has turned into a virtue, because the computer can diagnose the diseases much better than human beings can. After all, a good doctor can remember 200 or 300 cases, articles, issues. The computer remembers 2 to 3 million every second. And so the quality of the diagnosis is much higher. But he says we still need more doctors, and we need better doctors, but the doctors now need to focus on something else, which is how to help the patient understand what they have, what he or she has, how to overcome it, how to best adopt the diet, exercise, medicine regime that has been proposed. In other words, becoming a kind of life coach that will help the patient overcome the adversity and overcome the disease. And I think in there you have a very interesting metaphor, which is that as the machines get better and better, what education has to do is to teach human beings to become more human, to emphasize those qualities that machines will never be able to emphasize. And that is, in fact, what some of the best medical schools are beginning to think harder and harder about, which is if we're entering an age in which the machine can do some of the basic diagnosis better than the doctor, what is it that the doctor can do, and how should the training, how should the education system be redesigned, perhaps radically redesigned, to emphasize these very human and social skills that perhaps are not emphasized enough in a traditional medical education. These are the kinds of challenges you face, but I'm sure that you will be able to overcome them. Let me talk about the ones that I worry about and the one that I don't know that we will be able to overcome, and it is directly the one that Sheikha Moza has spoken of in her remarks, which is the challenge, in a sense, the political challenge of education in a post-truth age. I think we face a very difficult and daunting challenge now, because we are living through an age not just of technological revolution, but political revolution. You all know what I mean when I talk about the extraordinary event of Donald Trump being elected President of the United States. Whatever one thinks about it, it is we've never done anything like this before, and the United States has done some pretty crazy things. But it's not just Donald Trump, you know. It's not just Donald Trump. Donald Trump certainly would like to think he is a unique, singular force in human affairs. But in fact, while there are some aspects of his personality that are clearly unique, he is part of a trend. This is not just about Trump. This is about Trump and Brexit and the rise of certain forces within France and Germany and Sweden and Italy. You are seeing it in an extraordinary breadth and pace around the world. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what is going on here? Well, here's how I can best put it to you. We are going through a transformation of how we define ourselves politically. In the 20th century, we defined ourselves politically very simply. It was a left-right divide, and the key issue was the role of the state in the economy. People on the left believed in more state intervention, people on the right believed in less. In a way, the simplest way to predict how you were going to vote, in the Western world certainly, was whether you asked the question how much money you made. If you were poor or working class, you tended to vote left of center. If you were rich, professional class, you tended to vote right of center. That was the Democrats versus the Republicans, Labor versus the Conservatives. And even in countries far-flung from the West, I grew up in India, you saw this same divide shape the political consciousness and the party alignments of almost every country around the world. There were the Marxists on the extreme end. There would be conservatives on the other end. What has happened in the Western world over the last 30 years is a political transformation, a slow but steady one. It began in the 1970s when you started to see people define themselves not entirely on the basis of their economic status, working class, professional class, blue collar, white collar, but rather on the basis of a whole host of new issues relating to gender, relating to national origin, relating to race. So you were defining yourself as a woman, as a Hispanic, as an African American, and then later on sexual orientation and things like that. All these definitions became larger than the core economic ones, so that by the mid-1990s, what you found is it was no longer easy to predict how somebody would vote in an election in the United States based on their economic identity. The first sign of this we saw was something that was called the Reagan Democrats. This was blue-collar, working-class people who started voting right of center when they started voting for Ronald Reagan. By the mid-1990s, it turned out that the single best predictor of your vote in an American election was no longer your economic situation, but your views on a subject like abortion. By the mid-2000s, it turned out that the single best predictor of how you voted was no longer your economic identity, but your views on gay marriage. Because what had happened is people had started to define themselves more and more by these social and cultural issues. And if you want to understand the rise of Donald Trump and the rise of so many of these forces, keep this in mind. This phenomenon is happening particularly concentratedly in a series of countries. It's not happening so much in Asia. Asia has elected market-friendly reformers in India, in Indonesia, in Japan. It's not happening so much in Latin America. Latin America was the home of populism in some ways. You know, when you think of populists, you think of Che Guevara and the idea of these kind of, national forces. Well, those are dying in Latin America. What is rising again are market-friendly reformers in Mexico, in Brazil, in Argentina. Where you are seeing this is in the Western world, in countries that are doing well economically, like Northern Europe, and countries that are not doing so well in Southern Europe. Countries to the east, like Poland and Hungary, countries to the west, like France and the United States. What they all have in common is they have immigrants. And those immigrants are, in a sense, a symbol of cultural change. And what you are witnessing is a reaction to that cultural change. It's not just about immigrants. It's about the rise of women. It's about the rise of minorities. It's about a world that is turning and churning very fast. And for a certain segment of the population, they say, stop this train, I want to get off. They say, stop this world from moving so fast. The most important word in Donald Trump's hat is again. Make America great again. In other words, can we not just go back to a world in which you didn't have all this churn, you didn't have all these new cultural forces emanating? But that has become very difficult. You can't stop the train, you can't stop the world turning, and you shouldn't. It has provided enormous opportunity to millions and millions of people around the world. But this is the defining feature of our new politics. And you can see it in what I describe as the new tribalism. So the fundamental reality about the old form of politics was you could always compromise. You could always split the difference. Because if you wanted to spend $100 million and I didn't want to spend any money, well, there's a number in the middle. We could agree on compromise. If you wanted to raise taxes and I didn't want to, well, there was a way to find a balance there. But how do you compromise on core issues of culture, identity, where you feel as though it is the symbols and substance of your being, of your national meaning that are at stake? Compromise becomes betrayal. And that is why what you see in so many of these societies is there is a polarization where each side has chosen to be represented by forces that they feel represent them almost as a tribe for emotional reasons, and so you can't possibly imagine compromising with the other side. And of course, you cling and you hold on to these people regardless of any empirical evidence that they are helping your cause or hurting your cause. People wonder why it is that the core base of support for Donald Trump continues to stay very strong. The best analogy I could give you is a sports team. If you support your favorite sports team and it starts to do badly, you don't stop supporting it. In fact, it is an even greater act of loyalty to support the team when it's doing badly than when it's doing well. And that is what politics has become, a tribal associational sport where people are emotionally attached to the sides that they have chosen for complicated reasons of class and culture, and where they think of compromise as betrayal. And in that world, facts are becoming the great victim, because what would normally have moved politics is the collection of facts, the organization of evidence, and the construction of an argument. Well, that becomes very difficult when nothing is going to convince you, and you are able to find a way to use an alternate reality, alternate set of facts to construct your own confirmation bias about whatever it is you want to believe. And in this new world, technology actually has played a pernicious role. It has made it very easy to select facts from a vast, undifferentiated mass of information on the internet with no hierarchy at all. There is no distinction between truth and falsehood on the internet. In fact, falsehood is slightly privileged because the things that make something go viral on the internet are how sensational they are and how salacious. And of course, facts, lies are of course going to be, by definition, almost more sensational than the boring truth. And that reality, that technological reality, that lies now have something of an advantage over facts, over truth, has created an extraordinary problem of trying to navigate this new age of political revolution, this new age of political identity, this new tribalism, where we cannot see each other, we cannot compromise, we do not see how we find common ground. We are now living in a world in the West and the East increasingly, where we are all Sunnis and Shias, where it is impossible to understand how you can compromise and construct some common political, cultural, national, and global narrative. And the only solution to that is education. The only solution to that is to insist that there are, in fact, such things as facts, that there is something called truth, that it can be achieved by hard work, by evidence, by analysis, and that these are not simply the construction of alternate realities, each one equally valid, each one simply having its own space within your political and cultural framework. No, 2 + 2 is equal to 4. That isn't an opinion, that's a fact. We have to return to that core reality and recognize that defending this seemingly simple proposition has become a highly urgent and important task. It's something that all of you will have to take on with much greater sense of purpose and determination, because you will find that it is very easy in very subtle and sophisticated and very overt and aggressive ways to undermine that. And if you undermine that, the idea of truth, the idea of a fact, we will have entered an Alice in Wonderland world where everything is possible, where black is white, where up is down, where truth is falsehood, and where, as a result, no series of events or facts can ever prove somebody wrong, can ever prove somebody to have made a mistake, can ever prove that we have gone down the wrong path. This is a path to the decline of civilization, and the only thing that can stop it is education. So I say to all of you, you are doing something very important. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. Thank you.